This question comes from a viewer who asks, what would happen if someone took a deep breath of space? As much as I love space, there's really not that much good stuff in it to be breathing. Space isn't anything so much as the absence of stuff. It's not even like air, which itself is mostly just another kind of space, specifically the space between Earth's surface and its upper atmosphere. And depending on how high up you go, that space can contain lots of different things, some of which are quite dangerous to breathe in. But we're talking about outer space here, the vacuum of space. What happens if you take a deep breath of nothing? Well, let's talk about it. Okay, first off, it depends on what you're comparing this hypothetical to. Like, what does it mean to take a deep breath? Humans can take in about 6 to 7 liters of air with each lungful, but we also have our limits. The absolute maximum volume of air that we can move into our lungs with one very forceful inspiration is somewhere around 12 liters. But since no human has ever done that, we really don't know for sure. Our strongest professional athletes can come pretty close though. So let's assume that's true 12 liters, enough air to fill a standard party balloon and then some. That's a big gulp of air, but it's actually tiny compared to the size of the average human lung. Each lung can hold upwards of 6 liters of air when fully inflated. The record holder for the most air inhaled into the lungs was set back in 1987 at over 35 liters, nearly 3 times the volume of air in a typical party balloon. That still doesn't even come close to filling up your lungs because those same lungs can expand all the way up to an incredible 10 liters apiece when your diaphragm and intercostal muscles, those are the ones between your ribs, they contract and relax in a process known as passive inspiration. So we can say that if you inhale enough air to fill up your lungs completely, that's probably around 20 liters or so, although it won't be a natural breath by any stretch of the imagination. So now let's imagine taking that same volume of air, 20 liters worth, but this time it's pure oxygen. Would it hurt to take a deep breath of only oxygen? Actually, yes. Your body needs oxygen to survive, but too much oxygen is just as bad as too little. Breathing pure oxygen at sea level for more than a few hours will start to cause symptoms like a headache, nausea, and maybe even seizures. Taking a single massive gulp of pure oxygen wouldn't be lethal, but it would be extremely uncomfortable. And even worse, if you took a deep breath of pure oxygen while underwater, the increased pressure could actually rupture your lungs. So yeah, deep breaths of air are fine. Deep breaths of oxygen, not so much. But what about a deep breath of literally nothing? That means the weight of all the air molecules above us pressing down on our bodies. And the reason we don't immediately get crushed is because we're also mostly made up of gas, namely nitrogen. It's a similar situation inside our bodies. Most of our cells rely on diffusion to get nutrients in and waste products out. Diffusion is the process where molecules naturally spread from areas of high concentration to low concentration. When you inhale, you're essentially forcing air into your lungs, overriding the natural diffusion gradient. This means that if your lung cells are, say, a little damaged, then these cells could die. Now that's assuming you've got healthy lungs. If you don't, well, any kind of damage increases the risk of this happening. Smoking, for instance, causes inflammation and breaks down the tissue of your lungs, making them much more susceptible to rupturing under extreme pressure differences. Now, if you were in space, you wouldn't just be inhaling 20 liters of nothing. You'd be inhaling 20 liters of a near-perfect vacuum, meaning there'd be fewer than 10 molecules per 10 billion liters of space. There's more bacterial cells in your gut than that. So basically, the only way you'd be able to force 20 liters of space into your lungs is if your lungs were already blown apart. Even if that were the case, though, you'd only be able to suck in about 1/10 of a liter of space before the pressure equalized between your lungs and the outside environment. So it's incredibly unlikely that a human would ever take a deep breath of space. But assuming that you somehow managed to rip open your lungs and suck in the vacuum of space, would you be okay? Well, actually, yes, at least after 10 million years. So long as the hole in your chest cavity didn't get infected, you'd be perfectly fine. In fact, humans could probably survive in the vacuum of space for extended periods of time, assuming we're talking about the vacuum just beyond Earth's atmosphere. Without a spacesuit, we'd only last around 15 minutes due to the lack of oxygen and the dangerously high radiation levels. But if we could somehow breathe space, we'd be fine, at least until we ran out of oxygen, and that'd only happen after around 40 seconds. At that point, we'd experience unconsciousness followed by death within a couple of minutes. But you didn't ask about surviving. You wanted to know what would happen if we took a deep breath of space. And technically speaking, we do that every day. Some people might tell you that the solar wind, a constant stream of charged particles emanating from the sun, is somehow magnetically guided towards the North Pole, where it cancels out the magnetic field lines coming from Earth's core. This cancellation, they say, leaves behind a region of space free from matter, a window into the true vacuum of the universe. The problem is that this isn't exactly right. Yes, the solar wind does interact with our magnetosphere, but it doesn't cancel out Earth's magnetic field. Instead, the solar wind pushes our magnetosphere further out, stretching it along the day side of the planet. Because of this, the magnetosphere doesn't open up like a flap in an old cartoon, and no particle beams shoot out of the poles. And the solar wind isn't magnetically guided to the poles either. It's more like Earth's magnetic field wraps around the planet and acts as a shield. However, even though the solar wind does interact with Earth's magnetic field, it's still possible for charged particles to sneak through. This is called the cusp, a region of space where the solar wind pushes the magnetosphere so far away that Earth's magnetic field can't protect us. One such cusp is located over the northernmost tip of Canada. Another is over southern Australia, and both cusps leave windows into the vacuum of space. There's also the South Atlantic anomaly, which isn't a hole in the magnetosphere, but it's a region where the Van Allen radiation belts dip down closer to the surface of Earth. So yes, we do breathe in the solar wind all the time. According to some estimates, we get bombarded by about 10,000 particles per second, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that's just for the particles that make it all the way to the surface of the Earth. Up in the cusp, the flux is much higher. We get hit by roughly 10 million particles per second. If you stood in the cusp long enough, you'd probably feel unwell, nauseous even, but you wouldn't die unless you stood there for millions of years. In which case, congratulations, you've survived the dawn of the universe. We get that question a lot. What happens if questions?